Nadia Ose had a system. She always requested a corner table. She always brought a book or a report. She always ordered something she had been thinking about since the plane. And she always, without exception, ate alone. Not because she was sad. Not because she had no one to call. But because after 6 years of work trips, the airports, the conference rooms, the handshakes, the name badges, the careful professional smiling, dinner alone was the 1 hour of the day that belonged entirely to her. Vienna was her 4th city in 3 weeks. Before this it had been Nairobi, then Brussels, then a very confusing 2 days in Amsterdam where the hotel gave her a room with a window that looked directly into another room. She was tired in the way that sleep did not fully fix. The kind of tired that lived in the shoulders. But she had been thinking about Wiener Schnitzel since Heathrow. The restaurant was called Zur Forli. A colleague had recommended it with the specific enthusiasm people reserve for places they feel personally responsible for. Dark wood. Candles that were not trying too hard. A menu written in German with small English translations underneath, as if the English were a courtesy and not a guarantee. She was shown to a table near the window. Not a corner, but acceptable. She ordered the schnitzel, a glass of Gruner Veltliner, and opened her report on Zambian irrigation subsidies to page 47, which was where she had stopped on the train. Outside, Vienna did what Vienna always did in November. It got dark early and looked beautiful doing it. She read 3 pages. Made 2 notes in the margin. Ate 4 bites of warm bread. She was, by every measure, content. The woman arrived at the table beside hers at 7:43. Nadia noticed her the way you notice something precise and deliberate, not loudly, but unmistakably. The woman was somewhere in her late 60s. White hair pulled back in a way that suggested it had never been any other way. A charcoal wool coat that she removed and folded over the back of her chair with the calm of someone who had never once been in a hurry. Pearls. Real ones, probably. Not worn to impress, worn the way some people wear watches. Functional. Habitual. She sat with the posture of a woman who had spent decades in rooms where posture was noticed. She ordered without opening the menu. The waiter nodded in the way waiters nod at people they recognize. She did not look around the room. She did not check her phone. She simply sat, and the sitting looked like an occupation. Nadia looked at her for perhaps 4 seconds. The woman glanced once at Nadia. Not unkindly. The brief, honest inventory of someone who notices everything and remarks on nothing. Nadia nodded slightly. Returned to Zambia. 20 minutes passed. The schnitzel arrived. It was, she was relieved to confirm, exactly as good as promised. She ate 2 bites before reading further, which was her rule. Food deserved attention before it got shared with work. She was on page 51 when she heard it. Not a sound, exactly. More of a shift. The particular quiet that happens when someone receives news they were half expecting and fully dreading. She looked up without meaning to. The woman at the next table had her phone face down on the white tablecloth. Her wine glass was in her hand. Then it was back on the table. Then her hands were folded in her lap. The whole sequence took perhaps 8 seconds and communicated something that Nadia could not name but recognized immediately. She looked back at her report. She read the same sentence 3 times. Then the woman leaned across the space between their tables. Not frantically. Not desperately. Slowly, as if she had considered it and decided, and once she decided she did not hesitate. She leaned close enough that Nadia could smell her perfume, which was the kind of perfume that costs more than Nadia's coat and smells like it knows that. She said, in accented English that was formal and quiet and absolutely serious, "My dear, I am very sorry to impose on you. But my son is walking through the door in approximately 4 minutes, and I need you to be his fiancée." Nadia put down her fork. The woman waited. No performance in her face. No apology beyond the one she had already given. Just the steady gaze of someone who has asked an enormous thing and is prepared to be told no. Nadia looked at her for a long moment. The obvious response was no. A clear, polite, friendly no, followed by a return to page 51 and the remaining 2/3 of her schnitzel. She was a working economist from London eating dinner alone in Vienna. She had a flight at 6:45 in the morning. She did not know this woman. She did not do things like this. She was aware of all of that. She was also aware of something she had not expected to see in the woman's face. It was not drama. It was not manipulation. It was something quieter and much harder to look at. It was embarrassment. The old, private kind. The kind that does not show on the surface because it has been pressed down for so long it has become structural, like a beam behind a wall. You only see it if you know what load-bearing shame looks like. And Nadia, for reasons she would think about later on the walk back to her hotel, knew exactly what it looked like. She said, "What is the situation?" The woman told her. Her name was Margaret. Her son's name was Maximilian. He had been with a woman for 2 years, a woman the family had met twice and liked moderately, a woman who had this evening, 20 minutes ago, ended things by text message. Maximilian had replied to his mother's check-in message to let her know he was still coming to dinner. Because, Margaret said, with no particular emotion, he was stubborn in a way that had caused her 20 years of high blood pressure and also, separately, a great deal of pride. She could not watch him walk in alone. She had watched him walk through too many things alone. She was 68 years old and she was asking a stranger in a restaurant because there was no one else at the table to ask and she had approximately 3 minutes left. She knew, she said, exactly how it sounded. Nadia asked one question. Does he know? Will you tell him? Margaret said, he will know before he sits down. I am not asking you to deceive my son. I am asking you to help me hold my face together. That was it. That was the whole thing. Nadia picked up her fork. Ate one more bite of schnitzel, because she felt it deserved the respect of not being abandoned. Then she set it down and moved her report to her bag and said, all right. Margaret sat back. Straightened, fractionally. Said, thank you. And then, with the slightest shift in her expression that might, on another woman, have been a smile, your name? Nadia. That is a good name, Margaret said, as though names were things she evaluated. Then she turned back toward the door. He came through it at 7:51. Nadia saw him before Margaret did, because she was facing the entrance and Margaret was not. She had assembled some version of him in her head during the 3 minutes since Margaret had sat back down, some polished Viennese air, pressed and buttoned up, the kind of man who wears his background like a well-fitted jacket. He was not that. He came in with his coat half on, one arm still working through the sleeve, and the look of a man who had decided somewhere between the street and the door that he was going to be fine and had not yet finished the work of convincing himself. Tall. Dark coat. The kind of face that had probably been charming at 22 and had since become something more than that, something quieter, less available. He saw his mother. He saw Nadia. He stopped. It was a brief stop. A single beat. The internal recalibration was visible only in the way his hand finished pushing through the coat sleeve, just a fraction slower than it needed to. Margaret said, as if this were an ordinary dinner, as if she had not spent the last 4 minutes recruiting a stranger from the next table, Maximilian. This is Nadia. She has been kind enough to join us this evening. The pause that followed was the length of an entire conversation. He looked at Nadia. She looked at him. Something passed between them that neither of them would have been able to transcribe accurately, an understanding, or the beginning of one. An acknowledgement. A silent agreement that they were both, in their different ways, here now. He pulled out the chair across from Nadia and sat down. Nice to meet you, he said. His English was precise. Almost unaccented. The word nice did not quite match his expression, which was not unfriendly but was doing several things at once. Then, after a moment, quieter, how long have we been together? Margaret reached for her wine. Nadia said, 8 months. We met at a conference in London. He nodded slowly. What kind of conference? Agricultural development. Sub-Saharan focus. Something shifted in his face. Not surprise, exactly. More like recalibration. And what do you do? Economist. Mostly policy and water access. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm a structural engineer. I know, Nadia said. The corner of his mouth moved. Just slightly. Of course you do. The waiter came. Maximilian ordered without looking at the menu, the same way his mother had. Nadia filed that away as a thing families pass on without meaning to. And then they built it. Not elaborately. Not with the desperate overcrowding of detail that makes lies feel like lies. They built it the way you build anything that needs to hold weight, simply, with enough structure and no more. He had visited London in March, he said, which was true. She had been in Vienna once before, for a conference, 2 years ago, which was also true. She told Margaret that he left technical drawings on the kitchen table, which was invented, but she said it the way you say something you have said before, with the mild affection of someone who has already lost the argument about it. Margaret listened. Refilled everyone's wine. She did not perform warmth or enthusiasm. She simply sat differently. 3 centimeters of tension had left her shoulders. On another woman that would have been nothing. On Margaret it was the equivalent of a deep breath after a very long time of not breathing fully. Nadia noticed it and said nothing and felt something strange move through her that she did not examine directly. Maximilian was good at it. Better than she expected. He did not overdo it, did not reach for her hand or manufacture inside jokes. He simply matched her tone and her pace and occasionally looked at her with the specific expression of someone who knows a person, without specifying what they know. It was the most convincing thing about the whole evening and she could not decide if it made her more comfortable or less. Around the second glass of wine, Margaret asked Nadia about her work. Nadia talked for 7 minutes about irrigation policy and groundwater access and a project she had been running in Zambia for the past 18 months, and at no point did she simplify it or check whether it was landing. She had stopped doing that approximately 4 years ago. Either people were interested or they were not, and she had learned that pretending otherwise wasted everyone's time. Margaret was interested. She asked 2 precise follow-up questions that suggested she understood more than her expression let on. Maximilian was quiet, but Nadia could feel him paying attention in the way that some people have, not performing attention but actually in it, the kind where they lean back slightly rather than forward, as if they are listening with their whole body instead of just the front of their face. She caught herself, once. Just once, somewhere between dessert and the end of the meal, in the middle of a story she was telling about a very poorly organized conference in Addis Ababa involving a missing keynote speaker and a room full of delegates and a replacement projector that turned out to project exclusively in red, she caught herself forgetting, for a moment, that she had made all of this up. Not the story. The situation. The reason she was sitting here. She brought herself back. The waiter cleared the dessert plates. Margaret set her napkin on the table and excused herself, and in the few seconds before she stood she looked at Nadia with an expression that was not gratitude exactly, it was more complex than gratitude, and then she was gone. Nadia and Maximilian sat. The restaurant had filled around them during the course of the evening. Murmured German. The clink of glasses. The candles had burned lower. He said, "I'm sorry she did that." Nadia said, "I had a free dinner." He laughed. Short, real, unguarded, the first completely unguarded thing about him all evening. It changed his face noticeably. Made it younger and less careful. Then he was quiet for a moment. He turned his wine glass by the stem, not looking at it. Then he said, without setup, without framing it as anything in particular, "She hasn't asked anyone for anything in 40 years. Nadia heard it land. She did not say anything because there was nothing to say to that sentence. It was not looking for a response. It was just true, and he had said it, and now it sat on the table between them among the empty plates and the low candles like something he had been carrying for a while. She picked up her water glass. Took a sip. Set it down. He seemed to find this acceptable. Margaret returned. She thanked Nadia with the composed formality of someone delivering a small speech. It was, Nadia suspected, the warmest she knew how to be in public, and the fact that it still felt warm was something. At the door, Maximilian held Nadia's coat. Not performatively, he was already on his feet and it was simply the nearest coat and he handed it to her without ceremony. She put it on. The restaurant noise settled around them for a moment. He said, "I don't know your last name." She told him. He said, "I'll remember that." She did not ask why. She walked back to her hotel alone, which she had planned to do from the beginning. Vienna in November is the kind of cold that is also clean, and the streets near the restaurant were cobbled and lit, and she walked without rushing because she had learned that cities reveal different things at different speeds and she preferred the things Vienna revealed slowly. She got back to her room at 10:15. She sat at the small desk by the window. Opened her laptop. Found the irrigation report at page 51, which was where she had left it. Read the paragraph. It was about aquifer depletion in the copper belt, and it was important, and she had 3 days before it was due. She typed 3 words into the document. Deleted them. Closed the laptop. She sat there for a while in the dark with the Vienna lights coming through the gap in the curtains and thought about a woman who had not asked for anything in 40 years leaning across a restaurant table and asking anyway. She thought about what it costs to do that. What it means when someone has held things together for so long that asking for help feels like a structural failure. She thought about how the son had said it, quietly, plainly, without asking her to respond to it. She thought about the schnitzel, which had been very good and which she had not finished. She went to sleep. 2 weeks later she was back in London, at her desk, in the flat she kept in Peckham with the too small kitchen and the excellent light. She was on a call with a colleague in Lusaka when her email notification appeared. She finished the call. Opened her inbox. The subject line was empty. The sender was an address she did not recognize, but she knew immediately. The email had 1 line. She read it. She sat with it for a long time. Long enough that her tea went cold, which almost never happened. Long enough to decide 3 different things and then decide them differently. Then she opened a reply. And she wrote back.